For 100 millennia, the galactic concordance had pursued a singular, elegant goal: perfection. Their member species, the elder races, had long ago transcended the messy, chaotic struggles of their evolutionary pasts. The Lumina were beings of pure, coherent light, their forms immune to the ravages of time. The Sylvani were a collective of sentient, crystalline flora, their consciousness distributed across entire planets in a silent, harmonious network. The Ethel were ethereal beings of psionic energy, their minds vast and serene, their physical forms mere conduits for thought. They were beautiful, ancient, and above all, sterile. Their worlds were pristine masterpieces of ecological engineering. Atmospheres were filtered to the last microbe, oceans were sanitized, and all life was meticulously curated. Disease was a forgotten concept, a historical footnote from a barbaric age, their immune systems having had no true threats to face. For eons, were delicate vestigial things, marvels of genetic purity, but utterly naive. They lived in a galaxy of glass, exquisite and fragile. The horror began as a whisper in the void. A new phenomenon, designated the Carrion Blight, emerged from the uncharted territories of the galactic rim. It was not a fleet, not a weapon, but a fungal life form of terrifying adaptability. It traveled as microscopic spores, capable of surviving the vacuum of space for millennia. Its initial life cycle was deceptively benign. It was a saprophyte, a decomposer. It would land on dead worlds, on the derelict ships from forgotten wars, on any source of dead organic matter, and it would bloom. The Blight was an artist of decay. A derelict starship would be consumed in days, its metal hull turned to a brittle, rust-colored powder, its internal systems dissolved into a nutritious slurry. A dead planet, its ancient biomass long dormant, would bloom with vast, pulsating fungal forests, their caps reaching into the thin atmosphere like grotesque, silent cathedrals. The Concordance, in its detached wisdom, initially classified the Blight as a fascinating, if slightly unsettling, ecological curiosity. Then came the second stage of its life cycle. Once the Blight had consumed all available dead matter, it would evolve, rapidly, horrifically. It would re-engineer its own genetic code, adapting to the nearest source of living biomass. It became a predator. The first Concordance world to fall was Silva Prime, a garden planet of the Sylvani. A single dormant blight spore carried on a stray meteor had landed in a petrified ancient forest. It bloomed, consumed the petrified wood, and then, with a speed that defied all biological models, it adapted. Its hyphae, once designed to break down dead wood, became razor-sharp tendrils that burrowed into the living crystalline structures of the Sylvani. The pristine, harmonious world became a silent, screaming hell. The Blight spread like a gray, cancerous fire, consuming the sentient forests, their silent, collective consciousness dissolving into agonizing static. The Concordance's advanced medical technologies were useless. Their sterile, targeted nanoprobes could not adapt to the Blight's chaotic, rapid mutations. Silva Prime went dark. Panic, a long-forgotten and deeply inefficient emotion, rippled through the Concordance. They deployed their fleets not to fight, but to quarantine. They created a sterile cordon around the infected systems, their energy weapons vaporizing any ship, any life form that tried to escape. They were masters of isolation, but they had no cure. The Carrion Blight was a force of nature they could not comprehend, a chaotic, messy, and terrifyingly alive entity in their pristine, sterile universe. And it was spreading. Humanity's entry onto the galactic stage had been a source of profound disgust for the Concordance. We were a biological anomaly, a walking, talking biohazard. Our bodies were not sterile vessels, they were teeming ecosystems, home to trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi, that lived in a constant chaotic state of symbiosis and conflict. Our immune systems were not elegant, optimized constructs. They were battle-hardened, adaptable messes, forged in the crucible of 1,000,000 years of plagues, infections, and constant dirty warfare with our own planet's biosphere. Our worlds were quarantined, our people viewed as unclean. We were the galactic pariahs, a species too filthy to be allowed into the pristine gardens of the elder races. We lived on the fringes, in our own chaotic, vibrant, and biologically diverse corner of the galaxy, a source of morbid curiosity, but never of respect. When the Carrion Blight reached the edge of human space, the Concordants watched with a detached, clinical certainty. This chaotic, impure species, they reasoned, would be consumed in an instant. The Blight landed on a forgotten human colony world, New Gaia, a planet that had been abandoned centuries ago after a failed terraforming attempt. The world was a graveyard, littered with the rusting hulks of colony ships and the skeletal remains of Earth's failed biosphere. The Blight bloomed. It consumed the dead world with terrifying speed, turning the rusted metal to dust, the barren soil to a fertile fungal slurry. Then, it adapted. It evolved to target the nearest living biomass, the small, stubborn pockets of Earth-based life that had somehow clung to existence. The mutated grasses, the hardy insects, the resilient microbes, and that's when the Blight's perfect adaptive programming encountered a problem it had never faced before: competition. The Earth-based microbes, the bacteria and fungi that had survived the failed terraforming, were not the sterile, predictable building blocks of the Concordance worlds. They were survivors. They were aggressive. They were just as chaotic and adaptable as the Blight itself. A silent, microscopic war began in the soil of New Gaia. The Carrion Blight, a master of consuming and adapting, found itself in a quagmire. For every inch of ground it tried to conquer, it was met by 1 billion different, competing microorganisms, each with their own unique survival strategies. It was a war of attrition on a scale the Blight had never known. A Terran deep space probe, monitoring the Blight's advance, sent back baffling data. The Blight on New Gaia was not spreading. It was stalled. It was locked in a brutal, invisible struggle with the very filth that defined Earth's biology. Dr. Aris Thorne, a human xenobiologist who had spent his career studying the much-maligned human microbiome, saw the data and felt a surge of vindication. "They call us unclean," he muttered, a grim smile on his face. "They have no idea. Our uncleanliness, it's the most powerful, most adaptable weapon in the universe." The Concordants, their own worlds falling one by one, their perfect, sterile defenses proving useless, were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The chaotic, impure humans were not just surviving the Blight. They were, in some inexplicable way, fighting it. The call came, not as a formal diplomatic request, but as a desperate, fragmented plea from a dying Lumina world. "Humanity, your biology, it resists. We are failing. We require your assistance." The Terran Federation was faced with a profound moral choice. They could watch the arrogant, condescending elder races who had quarantined them for centuries be consumed by the Blight. Or they could help. The debate was fierce, but in the end, humanity's inherent, often illogical compassion won out. We would help, but we would do it on our own terms. Dr. Thorne was put in charge of Project Nightingale. It was a radical, almost insane proposal. They could not synthesize a cure for the Blight. It adapted too quickly, so they would not send a cure. They would send the source of their resilience itself. They would send humans. The volunteers for Project Nightingale were not soldiers. They were farmers, doctors, biologists, even sanitation workers. They were individuals with particularly robust and diverse microbiomes, people who had lived in close contact with the messy, chaotic biology of Earth. They were humanity's walking immune systems. They were the gut walkers. Their mission was not to fight the Blight with weapons. It was to introduce their own, aggressive, and highly adaptive Earth-based biology into the sterile alien worlds to create a biological firewall that would outcompete and starve the Carrion Blight. They were not an army. They were a controlled, therapeutic plague. Commander Eva Rostova, a veteran of numerous deep space humanitarian missions, was given command of the first Nightingale vessel, the Hippocrates. The ship was not a warship. It was a mobile biological laboratory, its cargo holds filled not with weapons, but with soil samples, water from Earth's oceans, and specialized containment units for the gut walkers themselves. So, let me get this straight, Doctor, Rostova said, her face a mask of grim professionalism as she reviewed the mission parameters. My mission is to fly into a quarantined, plague-infested system and intentionally contaminate it with our own people? Precisely, Commander, Thorne replied, his eyes gleaming with a fierce scientific intensity. You are not contaminating. You are inoculating. You are introducing a complex, resilient ecosystem to fight a simple, albeit aggressive, monoculture. You are fighting a fire with a controlled burn. It will be messy. It will be unpredictable. But it is our only hope. The first deployment of the gut walkers was to the Sylvani world of Viridia, a planet whose crystalline forests were being systematically consumed by the Carrion Blight. The Hippocrates breached the Concordance quarantine, its small, fast vessel, slipping past the silent, watching Lumina cruisers. They landed in a safe zone, a small valley that the Blight had not yet reached, but whose sterile ecosystem was already showing signs of collapse. The gut walkers, clad in simple environmental suits, disembarked. They were not an army. They were gardeners in a dying world. Their first act was not to attack the Blight, but to seed the environment. They released carefully selected strains of Earth-based bacteria and fungi into the soil. They introduced extremophiles, organisms capable of thriving in the harshest conditions. They planted hardy, fast-growing earth grasses and weeds. The effect was immediate, and to the observing Sylvani, horrifying. The pristine, ordered, crystalline soil of Viridia was suddenly overrun with a chaotic explosion of Earth-based life. Dandelions, a species of such aggressive resilience that they were a symbol of stubbornness on Earth, sprouted from the cracks in the crystalline ground. Aggressive soil bacteria began to break down the sterile mineral compositions. The world was being terraformed, not by elegant machines, but by the relentless, messy vitality of Earth's biosphere. The Sylvani, in their silent, collective consciousness, projected a wave of profound distress. The humans, they are not fighting the Blight. They are destroying our world. They are replacing one plague with another. Then the Carrion Blight reached the human-seeded zone, and the true war began. The Blight, a master of consuming. Sterile, predictable life found itself in a biological nightmare. The soil was a seething battlefield of 1 billion different microbes, each competing for resources. The dandelions, with their deep, tenacious roots, choked out the Blights, surface-level hyphae. The aggressive earth bacteria outcompeted the Blight for essential nutrients. It was not a war of glorious battles, but a slow, grinding, microscopic war of attrition. The Blight, for all its adaptability, was a monoculture. It was a single, unified organism. Earth's biome was a chaotic, decentralized mob. It had no single point of failure. It simply endured. The gut walkers themselves were the key. Their very presence, the constant shedding of their own skin cells, the microbes in their breath, reinforced the Earth biome. They walked the blighted lands, their boots carrying seeds and spores, their bodies acting as mobile inoculation centers. Slowly, agonizingly, the Blight began to recede from the human-seeded zone. It was not destroyed. It was simply outcompeted. It was being starved out, choked out, pushed back by the sheer, relentless, and messy vitality of Earth's life. The success on Viridia was undeniable, if deeply unsettling to the Concordance. The Gutwalkers had saved the planet, but they had also irrevocably changed it. The pristine, crystalline gardens of the Sylvani were now dotted with patches of messy, chaotic, but undeniably resilient Earth-based life. Dandelions grew alongside glowing crystal ferns. Earthworms aerated the soil beneath shimmering light moss. Project Nightingale expanded. The Gutwalkers became known as the Gardeners of Chaos, specialists in a new, bizarre form of ecological warfare. They learned to tailor their approach to each specific world. For a Lumina world, whose energy-based life was vulnerable to the Blight's energy-draining properties, they introduced bioluminescent earth fungi and algae, creating a competing, resilient energy source. For a world of the gaseous ethyl, they deployed specialized airborne bacteria, creating a living, self-replicating shield in the upper atmosphere. They were not just contaminating, they were curating. They were weaving the resilience of Earth's biology into the fragile tapestry of the Concordance worlds, creating new, hybrid ecosystems that were stronger, messier, and infinitely more adaptable than the sterile perfection of before. The Gutwalkers themselves began to change. Prolonged exposure to alien environments and the constant, low-level interaction with the Blight caused their own internal biomes to evolve. They became even more resilient, their bodies a living laboratory of interspecies, microbial adaptation. But the Carrion Blight was also learning. It was a master of evolution. It had been stymied by the sheer diversity of Earth's biome, but it had not been defeated. It began to do something unprecedented. It began to incorporate Earth's biology into its own. A new, more dangerous strain of the Blight emerged. It was no longer just a fungal entity. It was a hybrid, a terrifying fusion of the Blight's relentless consumption and Earth's chaotic adaptability. It could mimic the behavior of Earth microbes, allowing it to bypass the biological firewalls the Gutwalkers had created. It could, even in its most terrifying new form, directly target and consume the Earth-based life, using its own resilience against it. The war had entered a new, more dangerous phase. The Gardeners of Chaos were now facing a twisted, monstrous reflection of their own strength. The new hybrid Blight was a nightmare. It spread with a terrifying speed, consuming both alien and Earth-based life with equal ferocity. The Gutwalkers, once the cure, were now facing a disease that had learned from their own biology. The final battle of the war was not fought with ships or weapons. It was fought on a microscopic level, in the soil, in the air, and within the very bodies of the Gutwalkers themselves. Dr. Aris Thorne, now stationed on a mobile research vessel, worked tirelessly. He realized that the only way to fight the hybrid Blight was to accelerate humanity's own evolution. He began to analyze the unique biomes of the most resilient Gutwalkers, identifying the specific microbes, the unique genetic adaptations that were proving most effective against the new Blight. He then created a new, more potent inoculation, a carefully curated cocktail of the most aggressive, adaptable, and resilient microorganisms humanity had to offer. The Gutwalkers underwent a second, more intense seeding. They willingly introduced these hyper-aggressive microbes into their own systems, turning their bodies into the primary battleground of the war. The experience was agonizing. They were racked with fevers, their bodies constantly fighting a low-level internal war, but they endured. Their immune systems, pushed to their absolute limits, evolved at an unprecedented rate. They were becoming something more than human. Their bodies a living, constantly adapting weapon system. Commander Eva Rostova led the final desperate charge. She and her team of hyper-evolved Gutwalkers deployed to the heart of the hybrid Blight's infestation. A world that was a swirling, chaotic mess of alien and Earth-based life, all being consumed by the new, terrifying plague. They did not deploy weapons. They simply walked. Their bodies, now radiating a faint, almost invisible aura of hyper-aggressive biological energy, became the epicenters of a new, more powerful inoculation. The microbes they carried, the very essence of their evolved resilience, spread through the environment, engaging the hybrid blight in a final all-or-nothing war. Rostova stood at the heart of the blight, a lone, frail human figure in a world of monstrous fungal chaos. But she was not alone. Within her and around her, a trillion tiny, invisible battles were being fought, a war of adaptation, of evolution, of life itself. The hybrid blight, for all its power, had made a fatal error. It had incorporated the chaos of Earth's biology, but it was still a single, unified entity. Humanity's biome was a decentralized, multi-front, and utterly relentless force. It did not have a single point of failure. It did not have a central command. It simply survived. Slowly, agonizingly, the hybrid blight began to recede. It was not defeated in a single glorious battle. It was simply out-evolved. The sheer, relentless, and beautiful chaos of Earth's biology had once again proven to be the ultimate weapon. The Carrion Blight was finally truly defeated. But the galaxy was forever changed. The pristine, sterile worlds of the elder races were gone. In their place were new, vibrant, and incredibly diverse ecosystems, a chaotic but beautiful fusion of alien and Earth-based life. Dandelions grew in the crystalline soil of Silva Prime. Earthworms aerated the glowing fungal forests of a mycelial world. The air of the Lumina's home was now filled with 1 billion different harmless Earth microbes. The elder races themselves were changed. Their contact with humanity's biology had forced their own immune systems to adapt, to evolve. They were no longer perfectly sterile, no longer pristine. They were healthier, more resilient. They had learned the profound and often painful lesson that true strength lies not in purity, but in diversity, in adaptation, in the messy, beautiful chaos of life itself. Humanity, once the galactic pariah, was now revered as the saviors, the gardeners of the galaxy. Dr. Aris Thorne, the man who had championed humanity's filth, became a figure of immense respect. The Gutwalkers, though their bodies were forever changed, were hailed as heroes, the living embodiment of humanity's unique and now celebrated biological resilience. Commander Rostova, in her later years, would often walk through the newly terraformed gardens of a grateful alien world. She would see a human child playing alongside a young crystalline Sylvani, their laughter mingling in the now rich microbe-filled air. The galaxy was no longer a collection of isolated, perfect glass houses. It was a single, vast, interconnected, and beautifully imperfect garden. And humanity, the species that had never been afraid to get its hands dirty, were its most dedicated, most chaotic, and most essential gardeners. They had saved the galaxy not with their technology, not with their weapons, but with the simple, profound, and undeniable power of their own, unclean and gloriously alive bodies.